Hello students, welcome back to our course, and in these last two concluding lectures we will look at some of the practical implementation, we will look at some of the application aspect of semiotics when it comes to visual communication. So if you remember, today we are going to talk about image and text in precise, and if you remember, one of the components of visual communication when we were talking about visual communication design as such, and we talked about the two components of visual communication design, and these are image and text, and image and text in conjunction to a socio-cultural context. In other words, ultimately in your profession or whenever you are asked to design or do some visual communication, what will you resort to? You will resort to mainly two things. One is image and another is text. Now, using a combination of these two, you will be doing varied kind of communication, and what we try to learn over this course is how this communication takes place, or how, when it comes to image, how do we perceive it, what meaning it holds to us, how do we make meaning for that matter, and things like that. So ultimately, if it boils down, ultimately at the baseline it is image and text that you are going to work with. There are different kinds of designs being there proliferated all around you, some with this knowledge, some without with this knowledge, some with intuition, some with a scientific understanding, but whatever is there, it is there in our environment and it is filling up our visual senses. So to make this world a better place, to make the communication better, we need to understand how to plug and play image and text for efficiency, effectiveness and engagement in a better fashion. So today we will look at it in a bit of more details. Now, when it comes to making images and text, we have to look at one aspect very clearly, the image attribute causing interactive meaning. So what is the attribute in that image which causes interactive meaning? That is something we need to look at, that there are certain qualities in an image which attributes to the interaction, and this is something we will precisely talk about today, that what are these qualities that we need to look at and hence design so that the interaction is correct. So if we look at these attributes, the first one is the contact. The first one is the contact attribute, the second one is the social distance attribute, and the third one is the attitude. So an image is constantly casting these three attributes. So one is the contact. You know, when we talk about contact, it means what kind of contact this particular image and text or a combination of both is having with the viewer. We talked about the represented participants and interactive participants. So now comes the question that what is the contact we are trying to cast between the represented participants and the interactive participants. What is the kind of interaction this image is trying to cast with its viewer. So this is what contact in short is. Then comes the social distance. With an image you can portray a social distance. So some could be very intimate and personal, some could be impersonal, some could be social. So you cast a distance based on some visual. So that is also possible, and that is also an interactive feature based on which images interact with each other. So you have to think of whether I want a social casting or whether I want an impersonal casting. So you have to plan all of this beforehand before embarking on the visual communication design. And the last but not the least is the attitude. What is the attitude that this particular image is trying to cast to us? So we will see each one of them in detail. So if we look at this Now, contact basically can happen in two manner. So, one which is a demand, and the other is a offer. So, a demand is something, the demand is basically you are demanding a gaze from the viewer, whereas offering is something very generic. So, this is the kind of the first level of contact. The first level of contact with the image is it demanding? Is it demanding the gaze of the viewer? Are you looking for that, or is it for a generic view? Is it offering something? It's not demanding a gaze, but it's just there to offer some kind of generic viewing. So, that's the first level that we need to look for what we are trying to cast in this particular design when it comes to contact. Now, let us look at the second aspect when it comes to the social distance. We have three levels of social distance over here. So, one could be intimate, one could be social, and the other is impersonal. So, these are three kinds of social distance possible. So, one which is very intimate, it is very personal, at the other end it is very impersonal. So, these are the social distances available, and the medium one is the social. So, how do you cast these three things? How do you cast a social distance in an image? Now, see, this is what the beauty of image, what it does, it is based on our visuality. When it comes to a very intimate social distance, you are trying to portray that, we go for a close shot. So, we go for a very close up view of a person or that material. So, that brings in an intimacy, whereas the distance that you are viewing right now, the screen on which you are viewing me, it is at a medium shot. These shots are cinematographic terms where we use what is the distance of the shot. So, this is a medium shot, and hence this is a social distance that we are trying to create over here. We are creating a socially amicable distance required for social interactions, and we are creating that over here. Whereas, just imagine this shot, had it been very far, you are viewing me one person far away amongst many things, that would become immediately impersonal. That would lose the social and intimate ties. You would feel that it is very impersonal, it does not relate to you anyway. So, these are three specific ways by which you can attain the social distance. Now, let us come to the attitude aspect of the image when it comes to interactive meaning generation. Attitude works on subjectivity, and the other one could be objectivity. Let me discuss a little bit, let me break it down a little bit further, that will be easier for you to understand. Say for example, when we talk about subjectivity, let us talk about involvement. So, is there any involvement with the image, or is there a detachment? So, do we have an involvement or do we have a detachment? So, whenever you have a frontal communication, you have a frontal angle, say for example, you are viewing me at a frontal angle, there is a sense of involvement. But had it been you are viewing me at an oblique, right? Say you are viewing me in this position and I am talking there. So, this image, if it had been shown like this, there is an obliqueness, and hence it brings a detachment. So, this is the attitude that the image projects, and this attitude is based on subjectivity. Is there an involvement or a detachment? So, this is another aspect which the subjectivity brings, and there is another division by which we can go with it, it is by the power. So, does the viewer has a power over the image? Is there a power of the viewer? Is there equality? Does this subjective imagery, does this attitude has a sense of equality, and does this have a representation power? So, basically what happens is, another aspect of attitude is what kind of power or what kind of supremacy this image has with its viewer. So, many a times the viewer takes the role of supremacy. So, things which are shown from higher angle. So, whenever if you use a higher angle, you are putting the viewer at a powerful position, you are putting the viewer power over there, whereas if it is in the same level, eye level, you are bringing equality amongst the user. And similarly, if it is at a lower level, the representation, the represented participant is taking a power over interactive participant, it looks overwhelming. So, if you look at an object from a lower angle, the feet are bigger, the object is dominating on top of you. So, these are various kind of subjective attitudinal aspect that an image casts. So, you have to, before getting into design, you have to think of all of these aspects, what is your intent and how you are trying to communicate through that. Okay. Now, let us come to the objective attitudinal aspect. So, objective attitudinal aspect is that way pretty simple to understand. One is action oriented and another is knowledge oriented. So, when an attitude is objective, so sometimes the attitude is very objective and that is clearly dependent on your action. So, what are the actions which are being thought of, and that creates the attitudinal aspect. Otherwise, the knowledge that you are trying to portray, that brings in the attitude with it, which is very objective way of looking at it. What is the action and what is the attitude? Now, let us have a look at the slide over here. You can use this particular slide as a reading material later for a deeper understanding into it. Let us take an example now. Let us take this example where we are looking at an image. This is for the Beijing Olympic when it happened, and we are looking at a poster for that. Now, here you can analyze what all criteria, the interactive criteria, image criteria which were thought of when this poster was made. So, the demand was there was a demand for gaze. This is a social or impersonal perspective of looking at it, of course, because it is talking about Olympic Games, and so it has to be a social and impersonal. It brings in lot of involvement. So, there is lot of involvement associated with it because of the social distance. There is a viewer power plus eye level. This is something very interesting, how the subjectivity is brought into here. There is a viewer power. So, something is at a higher angle and you are looking at it, the mass from a higher angle. So, you are putting the viewer at a power. At the same time, there is equality that brings in a combination for what kind of poster it is trying to project. It is trying to project that Olympics is a sports for people, people should participate, viewing it and things like that. And then it is also trying to highlight the viewer that you are also a part of this poster, and then it is action oriented. So, this is how we can analyze a particular image and you can work towards designing this image. Now, let us go a step forward where we look into one of the models, which is the Royce's model, which looks at image and text in conjunction and how they are interrelated based on the actions, based on the process, the participants. So, based on whatever participants are involved, what process is happening there and what semiotic understanding is happening there. So, if you look at Royce's model suggests that there may exist complementarity of visual modes and textual modes in terms of their process description, participants and semiotic pattern. So, now let us look at it diagrammatically, what it exactly means. So, say for example, this particular diagram will give us a understanding of how it is working. So, we have image and text, they may have a complementarity, one is complementing others, and the image is talking about some process and the image has some participants. Similarly, the text also talks about some process and participants. Of course, the participants and process is interconnected because they are working together, and then both the process and participants have some semiotic type. because based on this semiotic tie, this is connected to the image and text, because as you understand, image and text are representations. We have talked about it. These are signifiers. These are nothing but signifiers. So, semiotics plays a role where the real time process, the real time participants and their interactions are channelized through semiotics and refers back to the image and text. That forms the entire domain where the Royce's model works. Now, what precisely Royce is talking about is a twofold approach. Let us look at the twofold approach which Royce talks about. The first approach is, it is possible to identify visual processes and their visual participants. So, what Royce suggests? The first step. Okay, so, what is the first step that you should do using Royce's model when you are looking at an imagery, is that you can identify the participants. Whenever you have a visual representation, you can identify the visual participants and the visual processes, what is happening between these participants. That is very, very clearly discernible in many of the visuals. And when you are designing, also think of who are the participants in your design and what are the processes. So, that is the first step that you take. And let us come to the second step. This second step is, these elements may then be brought into relation with the verbal participants and processes. So, what it says as a next step. So, first step, visual is there, within visual you understand the participants, understand the processes, and then you start mapping, you start putting some relationship of these participants and processes with that of the linguistic counterpart, with that of the verbal attribute will also have participants and processes, and you try to map with it. So, if you look again diagrammatically, so this was the diagram of Royce's model. So, we have this kind of connection. So, first we look at image, its process and participants. So, that is the first step that we have got, and then we start looking at the text and process and its participants, and we can see that there could be some interrelationship. So, that is what the entire Royce's model suggests, and then we analyze what is this interrelationship which is present there. So, we will have a look at one of the examples, but before that we will talk a little bit about visual message elements, or in short VME. So, Royce proposes two things about VME. The VME should be identified for all nonverbal components of an image: picture, diagram, graph, and all the abstract forms and all that. So, this is complementary to what Royce's model suggests, the twofold approach. So, here another terminology, another taxonomy has been brought into picture, is visual message elements. So, in an image you will find chunks of visuals which are conveying some kind of message. So, these in short are called visual message elements. So, first thing is you identify these visual message elements and you try to identify the relationship between these visual message elements. So, all your denotation, Gestalt's law, all of these mental model will help you understanding the connection between these visual message elements. So, that is the first step, and let us look at the second step. Then these visual message elements allow connection with the text or other images to be specified. So, now these visual message elements are the starting point, or are the nodal points from which you move on, migrate to the text counterpart. So, corresponding to this visual message elements, what is the text that is conveying the sense. So, this is how you should start when you are applying visual communication. This is something that you must remember, that whatever is there on your visual field are all visual message elements. They convey some message, and this message should correlate with that of text. We will see later that there are various ways image and text are connected, and you can use that, but this is the concept that you should keep in mind. So, let us look at this again. So, we have different visual message elements. This is exactly how you will look at a visual field with different visual message elements, and then you look at their interrelationship between these visual message elements, and then you look at text or other message elements, and then you draw connections. This visual message element is referring to this particular text, and this is how the relationship is established between text and image. That is what the Royce's model suggests. So, let us now have a look at one example. Let us look at an example over here. Say a little boy chased the dog with a fork in his hand. So, we have a sentence. So, this is a verbal verbal denotation or a verbal example that we are looking at, a linguistic example. Let us see how it works. So, the little boy and the dog are the participants over here. So, we have the actor, we have the goal, we have the overall participants over here, and then the chase part is the process. So, together we are finding that there are participants and there is a process over there, and then with a fork in his hand is nothing but it is describing a circumstance, it's elaborating a manner. So, what we exactly done over here is we have broken down the verbal message, we have broken down the linguistic message into chunks. We have tried to understand the participants, we have tried to understand the process, we have tried to understand the circumstances. Now, let us take a look at the visual counterpart. Had this been an image, okay, we do not have a sentence now, and we just have an image over here like this. So, now see, there is a boy. So, all these visual message elements, there is a boy over here, there is a fork, there is the cap falling off, the steps, there is a creature over here, there is a window. All of these things together are visual message elements, and they, can you identify the participants over here? Can you identify the process over here? Can you identify the situation or circumstance that you are building? So, these are certain things. So, before designing this graphic, you should have a very clear understanding, the verbal understanding of participants, process and circumstances, and hence you should start designing it. It could be other way around also, but there should be a mutual connection between that, and how it is happening we will just have a look at it. So, if we look at this graphic now, so how we have broken down, you can see the different elements fall into picture. There is a conjunctive relationship. So, we had the participants, we have the process, we have circumstances, and similarly all these visual message elements also add up to the same model which we were talking about, and hence there is a cohesion. Many a times in linguistic terms it is called conjunctive multimodality, or there is a cohesion. This is the sense of cohesion which comes into picture between text and image, but how, now you know the answer. How part is you have broken it down into visual message elements, and then you are knitting it back, all these visual message elements, in terms of its participants, in terms of the process, and in terms of the mannerism, and all represented in some manner. So, all knit together by a semiotic type. So, this is heavily being used by advertisement. So, there are many examples in advertisement structuring where we utilize this model, and there are two possible ways where we utilize. There is a replacement and there is a fusion. So, many a times the verbal counterpart is replaced by the image, and the image counterpart is replaced by the text part. So, there is a replacement. All these units that you see, all these visual message elements, one chunk is taken away and replaced by the text. Maybe the text is elaborating or extending that. We will talk about that just in a while. So, one part is that. The other part is the fusion part, which is where we are fusing both of them together. In most cases both of them are fused together and communicate one message. So, this is how we utilize advertisement, and many other forms utilize this heavily. So, now let us, how does it help? How does the Royce's model help us? First, it connects, it builds an intermodal complementarity. So, one complements the other, it builds cohesion, we have talked about it, some kind of comparison can be drawn. So, now you can compare two visual designs based on how their cohesive capacities are. So, you can do the assessment and evaluation, and then you can categorize these relationships just like the linguistic grammatical terminology. You can categorize these relationships. Is repetition happening? Is there a synonymy, antonymy, meronymy? Meronymy is where one is part of another, when one is part of another. So, you can find it out from this Royce's model if it is part of another, or you can have hyponymy, where hyponymy means it is a specific term for a generosity, generic attribute. So, all these aspects are a collocation, two things tend to come together, there is a usage wise two things tend to come together. So, all of this understanding could be built up using Royce's model. So, that is the importance of knowing Royce's model, and it helps us. Now, we again go back to visual metaphor, we have already discussed last week, but I will try to draw your attention over here that visual metaphor has a very strong connection between the text and image, where we have talked about visual metaphors in terms of similes, right. So, if you have a look at here, if you remember the example I have given, that car is like a dolphin, here both the elements are visually present. So, both visual elements are visually present, and hence that forms the simile. Whereas, in a contextual case, car is like a shark, only one element is present, one visual element is present, but the context is prevalent, because you are saying car is like a shark and you show a shark fin cutting through the road, that concept itself brings in a concept of a car, right. So, here the text, you can see the text and image, how they are interacting with each other and forming the metaphor. And then of course, you have a hybrid where card is like a muscle, where both the elements are present, but they are fused together. And then this is a representation based metaphorical context, and then you have a meaning based metaphorical context. Here we are talking about the representations, how whether one is present or one is absent, and this is a meaning based metaphorical concept, where you are talking whether they are parallel semiotic metaphor, both verbal and visual representations are congruent, they are mapping with each other. And then you have divergent semiotic metaphor, where one substantiates another, where the verbal substantiates the image, or the image substantiates the verbal part. So, one substantive information is passed one over another. So, there is a building up of information which takes place, and that divides the two metaphorical concept. Now, we talk about over here how do we expand information, or this is also known as multimodal conjunctive relations, where the image and text are used for expansion of information. Many a times the information is expanded, and we do it through certain means, and there are three possible means that we will talk about today. So, one mean is elaboration, the second one is extension, and the third one is enhancement. So, elaboration is nothing but it adds further information. So, this adds further information by exemplification or generalization. So, this adds further information by generalization. So, if we look at this particular example, how elaboration, it restates, it adds further information and generality and exemplification. One of the example is the little boy chased the dog, which was a mean thing to do. So, here we are saying a little boy chased the dog, this part is like you have a generic meaning out of here, and then which was a mean thing to do, it is generalizing that part, it is exemplifying which that part, it is restating that in a different form. So, this is elaboration, you are making the thing elaborate. So, an image text can interact with each other, they may have a relationship based on elaboration. Now, let us look what extension does. Extension also adds further semantically, intrinsically unrelated information. So, if we look at the same example, the little boy chased the dog and the dog ran away very fast towards the door. Now, what is happening over here? The little boy chased the dog is one part of information, and then the dog ran away very fast is another semantically, meaning wise, intrinsic quality wise on its own is a different information, but they have been brought together, and hence it is an extension of one with the other. So, this is what happens when you form extension, and just imagine image text also work in a similar form. The image could have its semantically intrinsic property, the text could have its semantically intrinsic property, but when they are brought together, bang, some extension happens and you make a different meaning altogether. So, this is happening all the time with us. Now that you know how they work and what is the phenomena that is working behind, let us look at the third one, which is enhancement, which is the one which offers qualifying information. So, there are other qualifying information in relation to time, place, manner, reason, purpose, talk. So, it basically talks about circumstances. So, here let us look at the same example again. The little boy chased the dog after he woke up just to find his shoes missing below the bed. So, these are some kind of additional qualifying information based on time, place, situation, manner. So, what happened to the boy before this and something like that. So, this is the enhancement part, we are enhancing the thing. So, this is continuously happening and we are making use of that. Let us have a look at here how it works. So, elaboration, when it comes to image text relation, when it comes to image text relation, there are two types of relation possible. One is image text and image relation. So, when it comes to image text, for elaboration we can work in two particular ways. One is specification. You can specify, there is a sense of specification. So, the image makes text more specific, image makes text specific, or vice versa. And other one is explanation. So, elaboration happens by an explanation. So, here the text paraphrases image or vice versa. So, you can understand how elaboration can take place in two ways. So, one is image makes the text specific. So, one is specifying other, or maybe the text is making the image specific. That is one way of elaboration. Another way of elaboration is expansion, where the text paraphrases image or vice versa. Now, let us come to the image and text extension possibilities. How does it work? It may work based on similarity. So, where you can understand the content of text and image are similar. So, that works as an extension. There is a similarity between image and text content, and hence that is similarity wise it is forming an extension, whereas it can also form extension by contrast, where the image and text are contrasting, and hence that is acting as a extension. The third one is complement. That is a true form of extension where the addition is happening, where the content of the image adds further information to the text or vice versa. The content of the text is adding further information to image. So, this is what you can have a look at the reading material later, as you can see over here. this is what is happening: elaboration, specification and explanation. What is interesting to have a look at here is specification, where the image makes text more specific or vice versa, leads to anchorage. In a imagery there will be forming an anchorage when there is a specification, there is a sense of specification between the two, whereas when there is a sense of complement, one adds more information to the other, the extension possibility, there is a sense of relaying. So, one is relaying another. So, there is anchorage and there is relaying based on specification and extension. Now, let us move on to the next part, where we were talking about image-image relationship. Image-image relationship can form with, there could be an elaboration based on overview and details. So, you are getting an overview view or a details view. An extension can be based on temporal, which is a time bound thing, based on spatial, or it could be based on logical. So, we will see the next step over here. So, the extension possibilities are by the next event, the previous event and simultaneous event. So, that these are the image extension which is possible. Are these one event or after the another? So, what happens in a sequence of audiovisual or a sequence of images? There is a temporality, there is a sequentiality, and you understand whether this is simultaneous, one or after the other. Then there could be spatial concept, where there could be proximity or co-presence. Are they in proximity to each other, or they are present simultaneously, co-present? So, there is a spatial aspect to it, and which forms the extension. Or the third one, if we can look at, is the logical, where there is a similarity and where there is a contrast, which is similar to the image text consideration. And elaboration is can happen where you are giving an overview of this, or you are deep diving into detail. So, these two possibilities are there with the image thing. So, let us look at an example over here. This is an illustration of a tree, a mulga tree, and the whole concept revolves around the mulga tree. Is an amazing plant, and you can see various images in sequence. So, here you can see one is specifying, the text is specifying something which is happening, it is explaining, it is restating, it is specifying. So, all of this together in this particular illustration, the image and text are connected together by form of elaboration, extension or enhancement. So, these are possible ways by which the image and text are knit together. If you see a deep dive over here, how that is making sense. So, say for example, this illustration was a part of it, the sun rays bounce off the leaf. Now, this is an elaboration which is justifying why mulga tree is an amazing plant. Similarly, the soil is not fertile and the falling leaves make its own food. So, this gives a understanding of all of it together, justifying why this tree is good or why this tree is being taken into reference. So, this is how, when you are designing image and text together, keep in mind the Royce's model and keep all the enhancements or expansion modalities which are possible, and that will make your designs much richer in future. Thank you students for your patient listening.